Doomberg, good to see you again, you big green chicken.
Peter, fantastic to be here. Had such a blast last time. I tell you what, our emails and comments lit up after our last appearance, and it was a real blast. And so when you reached out to have us back on, we accepted without hesitation. How are you doing on this fine day?
Well, listen, I'm good, man. But with this crazy world we're living in right now, I think we could probably make a show every 2 or 3 days with all this crazy shit going on.
Indeed.
What is going on, man?
We put out a piece this morning called Don Jerome, where we compared the events of the past week to the epic final act of The Godfather, where Michael Corleone takes care of all of the family business in one fell swoop. And it felt like that, especially on Sunday, when we saw this almost matter of fact, oh, by the way, we shut down Signature Bank, as a throwaway paragraph in a Fed press release about the resolution of Silicon Valley Bank. And lest anyone had any doubt what this was all about, a headline just crossed as we started to hit record here that one of the conditions of buying Signature from the FDIC will be that the buyer ceases all crypto activities. And so that was very clearly a shot across the bow against the crypto world, which is something we had, predicted and warned about for many years. Of course, not alone. Many people thought the same thing, but to see that play out so brutally and so coldly in black and white, and the speed with which both of the major payment rails into the crypto universe were blown up. The analogy is sort of like what happened to the Nord Stream 2 pipelines. You wake up one day and they're blown to smithereens, and so it's been fascinating.
Well, it's quite interesting because it's also happening over here in the UK at the same time. So I've just got up here, NatWest limits cryptocurrency transfers over scam fears. I know that I got an email from Gemini saying they've moved banking partner. I know Binance paused theirs as well. So it's not only happening in the US, but it's starting to feel coordinated over here as well. I don't know if you've seen this UK stuff.
Yes, we're following it closely, and we sort of envision a world where the U.S. dollar-based system, which we would wrap the Five Eyes countries in Europe into that U.S. dollar-based system, will potentially, I guess, operate a ring-fenced in KYC, AML compliant universe of crypto, but that presents some challenges. I'm not so sure. Another headline earlier this week was Fidelity is up and running, in the U.S., of course, but imagine if you're going to be interacting with somebody like Fidelity, you're pretty well cleansed from a KYC AML perspective. And so I don't know. This is really fascinating. Our piece today was a little speculative, to be sure, but that's kind of when you have a blog, why not speculate once in a while? But it does pose some interesting questions, and so it does seem coordinated for sure.
Yeah, and I put out a little tweet before this, which almost kind of like inspiration for the chat we're going to have. I was Googling Credit Suisse's scandals because it actually came up on the radio today. It had nothing to do with crypto. They didn't even mention that, but on the radio when I was driving back earlier today to come and do this interview, they were talking about their scandals. They mentioned Mozambique and money laundering and spying on staff, human trafficking. They've got clients for human traffickers, Venezuelans who've looted the country. And just a long list of fraudulent clients they have or fraud they've been wrapped up in. And now they're obviously they're calling it a liquidity crisis, but whatever. They're in financial difficulties and they're immediately awarded a $44 billion lifeline, whereas Bitcoiners who really are quite happy with just buying their Bitcoin and holding it are treated like they are the criminals here.
Well, when you're done Googling Credit Suisse, you can Google Deutsche Bank and see, I raise you a Deutsche Bank because when you want to talk about basically a criminal enterprise, in my view, with the amount of money laundering that goes through these banks, it has to be that it is done knowingly. So it is a fascinating and I think a very legitimate critique of these activities, and that's why we call the piece Don Jerome, because it's not like the authorities cracking down are the angels of goodness here. This is basically one more powerful mob family cracking down on people who've gone off of their desired path. And so it seems to be, look at JP Morgan with all of the whole Epstein scandal and they just sued a former top executive trying to pin the blame for JP Morgan having enabled all of this illicit activity on him, on that one particular person, as though the rest of the bank isn't involved in risk management somehow. And so it is certainly a double standard. We never doubted that it would be. But at the same time, as we said in the piece, broadly speaking, most Americans, if the U.S. says this is illegal and the banks forbid them from engaging in it, they won't. And so you will lose the median citizen. It'll just be like we're no coiners because it just, we have, a good life and assembled some wealth and happiness, and we would be willing to protect that, and the juice isn't worth the squeeze for us. It is for many, and for many of your listeners, and we're not criticizing that. But for the median American or Brit, when presented with the hassle of having to fight for a bank account's existence versus just ignoring a complete asset class, they will choose to ignore that asset class, in our view.
Well, look, listen, Doomberg, whether you guys hold Bitcoin or not, and I hold Bitcoin, as you would expect to know, we're still on the same side of this in that we both recognize the ills of central banks and what's happening within these fraudulent commercial banks. We both see everything that's happening is unfair. I don't think you would agree with, certainly, I don't think you would agree with Bitcoin being choked out away as an option for people. So we can be entirely on the same side of this. But when you mention these median people that you might lose, one of my difficulties is I'm like you. I'm spending all day on Twitter reading about these things, reading your articles when they come in my inbox, reading things from Lynn Alden. When I try and step outside my daytime work circle into my friendship groups, I'm always struggling to try and explain this without sounding like some kind of nutter or conspiracy theorist. Because I think my friends think I'm crazy. And, I will show them things like the Office of Budget Responsibility in the UK. I'll show them how much money the government is overspending and why this may be one of the reasons that we have issues with inflation. I will talk to them about criminals within banks, using banks to launder money. And then when I bring up Bitcoin, they're like, nah, no, Pete.
Yeah.
And so I have a real struggle with communicating this in a way that people actually take it as seriously as I think they should.
So it's fascinating that you should say that, Peter, because we had this conversation in the office earlier this week. So the editor-in-chief of Doomberg has decided to take an extended holiday from Twitter. And the world from that vantage point is completely different than the world they had experienced in the years and months before that, because Twitter has dissolved into sort of a even greater toxic cesspool than it has been. And it can be difficult to be on Twitter. But when you live in the Twitterverse like we do, because our livings depend on being connected and connecting dots quickly and seeing information as it is made available. Nobody cares. No. So we were specifically talking about the context of the whether or not bank contagion because of Silicon Valley Bank, and of course Signature and Silvergate, and now it looks like First Republic is in a spot of bother, to steal a British phrase. We speculated that if we went to our grocery store and asked 100 people about Silicon Valley Bank, no more than 5 would have ever heard of it still today. And so there is a phenomenon for sure that when you are entrenched in the Twitter universe, the algorithm is designed to make you feel like there's always a mania somewhere, there's always a panic somewhere. That's what drives the dopamine, which drives the engagement. And so I concur. The median citizen in the UK has a distant and probably slightly negative view of Bitcoin as being, quote, off limits or nefarious. And they just haven't spent the time thinking about it as we have. They're not afraid of the government. People still trust the government, strangely enough. And if they're worried about making the mortgage payment and how the price of eggs is hurting their budget, and they're not really pondering the sort of root causes of those things, because to go there can lead to some pretty ugly answers, as we both know.
Well, listen, the last 5-6 years of doing this, like an onion, I've been shedding my layers of supporting democracy and believing it's the best choice we have, and understand, trying to make out that, look, I understand politics is messy and dirty, but democracy is great. I think I shared the final skins this last week or so, where I was just like, I'm fucking done with this. And we can take Bitcoin out of the equation, Doomberg. We can take it completely out of the equation And I know when my friends like that, you say the price of eggs. I mean, I've got real world numbers. Look, it's going to sound very privileged to explain this next point, but just it is relevant. My kids go to a school which I have to pay for. I work hard to put them in there. Every year they put up the fees 3-4%. Yesterday I got a letter saying they're up 11.5% the school fees. That's going to affect a bunch of people. A lot of people, like my dad sent me to good school. He had worked every hour he could to do that. You've got a bar I'm trying to buy at the moment. The electricity and gas prices are about to triple because I've been on a long-term contract. Every single thing, whether it's refuse, drinks, everything is going up. I know people are experiencing this and feeling the burn. But when I even try and help them connect those dots as to why it's happening, there's this kind of like aversion to going down that rabbit hole. And all that, I think I know what will happen is we'll have a general election in 2 years and they'll change who they vote for. Yeah. And the same shit will happen.
Yeah. So first of all, what does it say about our society where you have to pre-apologize for talking about the fact that you've worked hard and have been able to do your best to provide an excellent education for your children at your own expense? But I digress. I'll give you an example where nobody escapes here in the United States, which is the Obamacare healthcare exchange networks. As small business owners, we're not part of some corporate health plan. I know in the UK, of course, you have the national healthcare system, but in the US, it's a perverted version of capitalism in the sense that you have to go into an open market and purchase it, but really it's an oligopoly. And since we've started our firm, our healthcare costs have compounded at 12% annual, long before inflation was a thing, and the amount you have to pay before the coverage kicks in just keeps growing and growing and growing. The deductible. The deductible, yeah. So for a family of 4 in the United States, you're looking at basically on average $1,500 a month before anything kicks in, and a $10,000 deductible. That's like basically the catastrophic plan, and it only goes up from there. And so the average person is out of pocket $18,000 in premiums and $10,000 deductible. So really, before you get anything meaningful, you have to cough up $28,000. And by the way, I have a relative dealing with cancer and been helping here and there over the years, and the bills at these hospital stays, if you actually look at the sort of the list price, it's just astronomical. And so, you might twist a knee and be out $28,000 before you have to put out any, it's just really staggering to me that, the pressure on that average person, right? And so in a way, it explains why they're sort of too distracted by the tactical needs of the day to think about the strategic consequences of how we got here and where we're going.
Well, the squeeze is everywhere at the moment, and it's quite. We had our budget this week in the UK. I don't know if you followed the budget. I mostly ignored it because I knew there was nothing in there that was going to change my life and make it better. I do know corporation tax is already going up, which is something that's going to squeeze my business more. Today, I had to deal with a pension issue that somebody needs a pension, so I have to contribute to that. But there's a constant squeeze on my business. There's this constant squeeze on individuals. This constant squeeze happens. But at no point in this budget did anyone come out within the government and said, yeah, we're going to reduce the size of government. We're going to reduce taxes. This is what we think will be a good way of stimulating the economy. Everything was done with taking more money off them that they think they can distribute in a better way to stimulate the economy. And I'm just like, look, this is bullshit. I know how to deploy capital better than you. And you're taking it away from me and you're making it harder for me on every business I have. Yet you as an institution continue to grow.
Yeah, in the U.S. again, it's something like 40+% of the economy now represents local, state, and federal expenditures, and our analogy is this is a giant game of Jenga, and there's only so many bricks from the bottom that you can take to put on top before the whole edifice collapses. Now, how close we are to that remains to be seen, but it does seem like we're reaching unsustainable levels. Washington D.C. in the U.S. compared to the rest of the country is this garden of opulence like you wouldn't believe. I mean, the concentration of millionaires in Washington, D.C. would shock you. And it's all basically lobbyists and former politicians, raping the public basically for ill-gotten gains. And as long as you pay off the right politicians and so on. And look, forever thus, I suppose if you go back and look at headlines in the 50s and 60s, you would see similar things, but that was back when the size of government was 20%. And now that it's 40 or 45%, it's becoming a real cancer. And Biden's latest budget is talking about raising the capital gains tax from low 20s to high 30s, nearly doubling the capital gains tax, which again punishes entrepreneurs. And so it's frustrating to watch. If you want to talk about broken politics, come to the U.S. it's really amazing. I had somebody reach out to me from the former East Germany when we wrote this piece about, again, crypto, which we started with poker, called Pandora's Precedent.
Yeah, great article.
And this person said, I'm reminded of, before the wall came down, about how as things got worse, citizens retreated to the comfort of their own home garden. Like you created a local environment that was peaceful, that you could be happy in, and you did your best to close your brain to what was going on outside. And she said that your article makes me suspect that this is beginning to happen in places like the U.S., where we have all of these tropes about freedom and all this stuff, but in reality, good luck trying to get a lot of U.S. dollars out of the U.S. dollar system if you wanted to move somewhere. Like we talk about capital controls in China.
You got the exit tax.
You got the exit tax, and so on, and so it's. I guess there's got to be some silver lining in here somewhere, and I'm sure we'll find it over the next few minutes. But it does seem like things are coming to a head.
Yeah, revolution has probably come in. Okay, so let's talk about this Pandora's precedent, because Nick Carter himself, you've probably seen what he's written about Operation Chokepoint, and it's become very, very clear what's happening. Before we get into what you talked about and that happened with the poker industry, which I've got an interesting anecdote, by the way. Do you separate crypto and Bitcoin, or do you consider them separate in this? Because I can see a much larger argument, even though I don't agree entirely with it, I can see a larger argument for choking out parts of the crypto industry. Whereas I think I always consider, naturally, I've got a Bitcoin show, I consider Bitcoin slightly different. Sure. I do consider Bitcoin, I consider its utility. I've seen how it's been used. I use it. It serves multiple purposes for me. I've never really bought or used any other crypto since 2017 when I first discovered crypto, because I have no use for any of it, and most of it is bullshit, or it's scams, or a way for people to maybe launder money. Like I'm not interested in NFTs, DAOs, tokens, or anything, but I do have a very significant interest in Bitcoin. Do you separate the two in your head, and do you separate the two when you're considering this kind of choking out?
So 3-part answer. Yes, we do separate Bitcoin from crypto for the following reason, which is the U.S. government does today as well, because it is regulated as an asset, and as long as you dutifully report your gains and losses to the IRS, it is totally legal to hold. And so not only do we distinguish it, but the U.S. government does as well. But what we hinted at in Pandora's Precedent, and what we said overtly in Don Jerome this morning, is when you go to that intermediate world where the U.S. has choked off crypto, but Bitcoin is still free and fully legal, it's difficult to imagine a world where money launderers don't take advantage of the fact that Bitcoin can be sent with basically no friction peer-to-peer to circumvent the newly installed anti-money laundering guardrails of the crypto world. And then eventually they'll come for your Bitcoin too. We're not saying that that's a good thing. We're saying that that's likely if you follow the train of logic. And so the point of Pandora's Precedent is how dangerous it is. And in fact, we quoted Nick Carter's piece quite extensively in Pandora's Precedent. As an aside, by the way, one of the things that's lacking from our discourse is, like, people assume that if you're skeptical on Bitcoin, you would never talk to or engage in a conversation with Nick Carter, or vice versa. Like, we've written skeptically about crypto and originally neutrally about Bitcoin, and maybe even slightly favorably because we do see we're sympathetic to the arguments for it and why it exists. We can have a discussion where we agree to disagree and we try to learn something. That's very, very lacking in our discourse today. So we read Nick Carter's piece, and of course it made us uncomfortable. And while we think he minimized by absence the sheer volume of fraud in the crypto world, The broader points that we're making I think are very much front and center for anybody who cares about personal freedom and liberty. And the U.S. government has weaponized access to the banking system to achieve political means. And with each passing episode, that median person that you and I wonder about becomes dull to the outrage. So one of the points we made in Pandora's Precedents is when they originally did this, of course, and for those who aren't familiar with the original Operation Chokepoint, this was done during the Obama presidency, where they illegally leaned on regulated banks to choke off access to banking and therefore destroy those businesses potentially for politically disfavored groups, but still totally legal groups like gun shops and payday lenders. And when that was uncovered, it was a huge scandal. And there were congressional hearings, and there was outrage, and the FDIC backed down, and the payday industry successfully sued where the FDIC settled on favorable terms to that industry. None of that's happening today because that's yesterday's scandal, and we've been dulled by it. We're numb to it now. Now everyone just expects, of course, it's perfectly natural that the U.S. government, without even having to have due process, even fake due process, can just shut you or kick you out of the banking system. And we said in the piece, like if you're even tangentially associated with crypto in the U.S., you best be prepared for lengthy calls from your bankers doing background checks and what's your business and what are you doing. You will very quickly find that the digits that you see on the screen that allegedly account for the dollar value of your deposits, those don't belong to you. You get to spend those if the government decides you're allowed to spend those, which is exactly opposite of how the country was meant to be created and run. And we start that piece with the story. We have a very good friend who was rolled up in the poker roll up of more than a decade ago. And
yeah,
the man did nothing wrong, got totally wiped out, was nearly bankrupted, and literally is still losing bank accounts 12 years later. It's incredible.
Well, I remember what happened in the poker industry because I used to play a lot of online poker. I used to play the 6-seater sit and go tournaments. And I can't remember at the time whether it was Victor Chandler or PokerStars. I used to play on them. There was a lot of tables, are always full. And I remember going on one day and it was just, there wasn't very many players there anymore. And I didn't know why at the time. And then obviously later on I heard about the kind of crackdown on offshore poker websites. But do you want to tell the story so people understand the precedent?
So it was called Black Friday in the poker world. And in the US, with the boom of online poker, there was no clear regulatory regime in place. And this is all going to sound very familiar to crypto enthusiasts or Bitcoin enthusiasts listening. In fact, a fair reading of the laws is that the Congress never intended for online poker to be illegal. It was specifically not named in a piece of legislation that passed in 2006 called Unlawful Internet Gambling Enforcement Act. And the real challenge was, is poker gambling or is poker a game of skill? Now, you've played poker. I've played poker. Skill is the ultimate determinant in who plays poker well. And so these three large companies, PokerStars, Ultimate Bets, and Full Tilt, I believe at the time, an aggressive prosecutor in the Southern District of New York, Prepara, decided that he found an old misdemeanor, a law in New York that made it a Class A misdemeanor, punishable up to a year in prison, to run a game of chance where bets are placed within the state. Now, again, is poker really a game of chance? I mean, I suppose there's some luck involved, but integrated over time. Poker is a skill game. And once you have a law that's broken, if you've used a bank in any way, shape, or form to do that, there's a plethora of felonies to choose from to hammer people with if a prosecutor wishes to be. And in fact, this raid came in April. I just want to make sure I got the date right. Yeah, April 15th, 2011, tax day, ironically. Just the prior December, Congress was debating passing legislation that would have overtly legalized online poker and regulated it. It would have created a tax stream. It would have created a new industry. There was all kinds of innovative things going on in that space. And it failed largely because the rumor at the time was that the National Football League was opposed to it. So that got killed at the last minute. And then this prosecutor in New York decided to crush the entire industry. And he did so on very flimsy means. But then, so my friend, who was an investor in one of these companies and was a famous poker player, a talented poker player, and he had a whole series of investments in poker companies and others that I would guess probably were worth about $100 million on paper. And he got rolled up, and he was wiped out. He was on the verge of bankruptcy, and the Fed said, "You will settle this civil complaint that we will draft. You won't have to admit guilt, but if you don't, we're going to take you to the mat and we're going to put you in jail."
Okay, so they blackmailed him.
Essentially, well, the quote in the piece from him, because I suspect as part of his consent decree, he's not allowed to deny having done anything wrong, even though he didn't have to admit it. He said, and I quote, "When the U.S. government decides that it wants to put you out of business, the specifics of the law aren't nearly as important as the intent of the prosecutors." And here's the money quote: "The amount of leverage they can bring to bear against you is formidable and vastly outweighs the protections of due process." There was no due process here. His net worth was destroyed, and they were making him an offer he can't refuse, to pull a quote from The Godfather. You sign on the dotted line, or if you think this hurts, wait until you see what we'll do if you don't. And this is not due process, and this is not how America was founded. It's not how most people think the country operates. And it's easy to say, "Oh, poker's kind of sketchy. I'm not involved in poker, so I'm not going to really worry about it. As long as I don't play poker, I'll be okay." Well, that's not really how things go, because there's ethical incrementalism. Once something is normalized, it only gets a little bit more aggressive, like we're seeing now with Operation Chokepoint 2.
Aren't the three branches of government meant to prevent this from happening?
Well, that's I remember when I was in the corporate world, and a wise mentor once said something to me. There's a vast chasm between having an argument and having a case. And sure, your rights are being violated. Write a letter to your congressman. In the meantime, you've got 24 hours to sign the civil charge resolution that we've drafted for you, or we'll see you in court. This is your deadline. Go ahead and call your congressman. Thursday at 9 a.m., this offer expires. So what do you do? I mean, again, what are the consequences to the prosecutor in this case? Nothing. And in reality, months later, much of the legal underpinning was overturned in the courts. But that doesn't mean that my friend isn't still losing bank accounts. Where does he go to get his reputation back?
And when you guys are discussing this internally, or you're thinking about this and why it's happened, do you think this is coordinated group, some kind of group oppression, or do you think this is just how the organism of government will naturally evolve towards?
Yeah, I would say the latter. There are evil people in the government who, power structures distill psychopathy. Let's be very clear. It's the same in corporate America. It's the same in government. If there's levers of power to be had, psychopaths tend to distill into those positions. They self-select for them. And if you have any doubt, just read the Lyndon Johnson biographies by Robert Caro, and you'll be shocked to see the type of behavior that he went through during his entire career to achieve the apex of political power in the United States. And so part of it is a consequence of the design. And then there's another really important factor at play here, which is the primary purpose of a bureaucracy is to grow. Right? Having been in charge of large bureaucracies that, I have decided, or our team has decided, needed to shrink, boy, is it hard to do. Right? And the purpose of a bureaucracy is to grow. This is why it's almost impossible to fire a federal employee in the United States. Good luck. And so if you look at the number of people employed by the federal government, it never goes down. Corporations still have restructurings because they have investors to be accountable for, but the best place to be in a recession is on the government dole.
Yeah, I mean, this is what Eric Voorhees said to me very early on. I don't know if you know Eric. He's a crypto guy, early Bitcoiner, staunch libertarian. One of my very first interviews with him always stuck with me. He said, the problem with the government is it always grows. And it's like, why can't we just, I'm not here saying let's get rid of all of government. Let's shrink it by 1%. And, you can go back to COVID when, I've got some of during the time of COVID, I'd definitely interpreted some bits wrong. But when they locked us down and they locked down businesses and people lost their incomes and lost, and did lose their businesses, everybody in government still got paid.
Yeah, look, we lost 85% of our business from apex to trough in 60 days. And there wouldn't be Doomberg if it wasn't for COVID, because we had to reinvent ourselves, and we did, and we ended up going into the content space, and then we eventually succeeded and then launched Doomberg. But so in a way, COVID was a blessing, but that's sort of the entrepreneurial spirit that we have. But there's no question that we had a record month, I believe, in April for revenue and a record month in June for all the wrong reasons. It happened that quick. And then, you still had a lot of uncertainty. When would we reopen? What do we do? Luckily, we had sort of saved for a rainy day, and we were able to, make it through that period of crisis. And we didn't go to zero, and we were able to sort of tighten our personal budgets, and then regrew our business in a different vertical within a year. But that was a huge blow. And as you say, but also, if you're an employee of a big corporation and you manage to keep your job, very similar. But it really did crush small businesses and entrepreneurs disproportionately so. And I still think we're seeing the aftershocks of that to this day.
Yeah, and definitely a widening wealth gap that's come off the back of that, and all these other just ongoing issues that are still people are still having to live with. Just going back to the poker story and what happened there, like how did it all end? I mean, was it just a complete shutdown of the poker industry in the US?
No, in fact, I may get some of the details wrong because I wasn't in the poker world. I only know this because of my friend. But ultimately, I believe Full Tilt Poker was forced into a shotgun marriage with Poker Stars. So Poker Stars had survived Black Friday and had made U.S. customers whole. There was an extra scandal at Full Tilt because they had lost access to banking, and the CEO, I believe, unbeknownst to the board, was still making players whole even though they didn't have the money, and so there was a hole. Eventually, Full Tilt was merged into Poker Stars, I believe, and it took a few weeks or months or perhaps even years for people to be made whole, but most people were made whole. And I'm unaware of what the regulations are in the U.S. today, but I do know that online poker is still widely played around the world, and people are enjoying a good game of skill and risk. And so, but it was, and I did mention earlier, like I do believe that the legal underpinnings for the original warrants were tossed out of court. But that doesn't matter if you've signed, so take my friend. And again, I don't want to give away too many details because he did ask, for anonymity, which I totally understand. But if you have a bank account and they do a spot check on you and they see that you've settled with the DOJ, to that bank, your business is just not worth it to them. And so ejection from the banking system can be random, happens for political reasons in the US all the time. It's rarely reported about. And you can, in a way, it's more devastating than being on probation for having been convicted for something, because like not being able to bank in 2023 is akin to not being able to function in society. And as psychopaths distill into positions of power in ever-growing bureaucracies, they see the power of this tool. And it didn't take long, of course, for partisans to realize that. And so in the piece, after we talked about crypto and we introduced poker, talked about crypto, we talked about the battle over fossil fuels and global warming and ESG and how activists on both sides realize that this is quickly becoming a game about who can convince the banks to do something. And we have a picture in the piece about environmental protesters sitting outside of a Chase Bank lobby with signs that say Chase funds death because they underwrite, the development of natural gas or oil fields and so on. And so the environmentalists were quick to realize that if they could choke off the fossil fuel industry, they could kill it. And now the Republican side, the conservative side, the oil and gas companies are fighting back by revoking banking and investment, management fees from firms that disproportionately defund or debank the fossil fuel sector. So now we have this tug of war. Instead of a strategic discussion around what's legal and what should happen, it is a tactical, extra-legal brawl where, one of the things that didn't make it into the piece, but we speculated like there might come a point where the CEO positions of banks are appointed by the president and must be approved by the Senate, no different than the Supreme Court battles that we have, recognizing that the power of a CEO of a bank is in many ways more powerful than a local politician.
Huh. So is this why you think not only are they bailing out the banks, but also stepping in early with the likes of Signature because they want complete control of the banking sector?
I think they are ejecting crypto from the U.S. banking system. That is what's going on.
Well, that as well. But then also, I guess, in seeing all that, is that where you're kind of like, even if it's mild, but rising sympathies for Bitcoin is coming from?
Well, my sympathies for Bitcoin predate this. Since I'm a bit of a gold bug, I understand. If you look at the rationale for Bitcoin and the rationale for owning gold, there's a lot of overlap in those Venn diagrams. To the people who enjoy gold, like us, gold is 5,000 years worth of historical money. All other fiats are impostures. And in a way, as we said in the piece this morning, Bitcoin has been sort of shopped around as a digital version of gold, a new and improved one that you can operate online, and you don't have to worry about weighing your gold and whether it's pure and and so on and so on. But at the same time, as we said in the piece, look, the U.S. outlawed the possession of gold in the 1930s, and it wasn't legalized again until the 70s. And they could do the same thing with Bitcoin. They will never be able to kill Bitcoin, but they can make monetizing it within the legal system of the U.S. extremely difficult.
Yeah, and I'm with you on the analogies to gold, but even WikiLeaks is one of the first great examples of they went through their own essential Operation Chokepoint when they were debanked by all financial rails, whether it was MasterCard, Visa, PayPal, and it all happened very quickly. And you talk to, or you see the interviews with Julian Assange, and he will say Bitcoin saved WikiLeaks. Bitcoin was the thing that allowed them to still function, receive donations, and continue to function, like have an operational business. 2
points. That's precisely why we think Bitcoin will be a target. Mm-hmm. And two, forget about the financial system. They were deplatformed from the servers. The web page was not hosted. The perfect example is what happened to Parler after the January 6th affair in Washington, D.C. They say, if you get kicked off of Twitter, just invent your own Twitter. Okay, you go try and do that, and Amazon AWS doesn't host it. And at the Apple Store and the Google Play Store, kick out the app. And basically, Parler got parlered. It's actually a verb now. And regardless of what you think of Parler and whatever your political views are, there's no question that social media site was killed with no due process for political reasons. And WikiLeaks webpage, you can't find WikiLeaks was deplatformed from the internet. And again, what due process has Julian? It's actually quite a scandal.
Of course, I mean he's been deplatformed as a human within functional society,
and for engaging in the act of reporting.
Yeah,
reporters in the United States have long gotten classified leaks that became the sources of great stories that blew up into scandals. That's what the press is meant to do. Not anymore. That has been shifted to the alternative press. One of our fears, of course, is that Substack, by allowing the proliferation of all manner of reporting of various types and talents and so on, but being a relatively open platform, will make them a target eventually. And so, we shall see. We're eyes wide open on that, which is the name of one of our pieces that touches on this. And it is, I do think more and more people are waking up to it. But we got a long way to go. We're early, Peter, by a lot.
Yeah, well, I mean, just look, my hope is there is enough independent media now, whether it's yourself, whether it's a Joe Rogan, whoever it is out there just trying to expose this a bit more to the point where enough people care. And I feel like the fracturing of society, the fracturing of the financial system, I feel like we were at a time where we have an opportunity now to make enough people care.
I would say your example of Joe Rogan is both hopeful and also a little depressing, because he is undoubtedly the biggest of the big alternative voices, and he is beloved by tens of millions of people, and he is the ultimate. I guess the only one bigger than him that I can think of is Mr. Beast, but they're executing completely different business models. But they also tried to cancel him, didn't they?
Of course they did.
Very specifically. And so luckily he managed to persist. But I think also, how could that not shape his discourse, like even subconsciously? How does that not at least make him have doubts about whether he should go as hard on a certain topic as he might have prior to the attempted cancellation? You know, in many ways, it achieved several desired effects. So yeah, it's an open question, but he is certainly a very big voice, and I hope he keeps it.
Yeah. Okay. Can we talk a little bit more about, because we're talking about Operation Chokepoint 2.0 essentially, which might become a rolling Operation Chokepoint. But can you talk a little bit more in detail what happened with the original Operation Chokepoint? What happened back in 2013? Because I'm not sure people are exactly sure what happened.
So at its essence, the FDIC illegally put pressure on regulated banks to stop doing business with payday lenders, gun shops, and maybe a few other.
Was it sex workers as well?
Yeah, sure. Pick your favorite, loosely associated with vice-type industries. You know, the U.S. back then was still a pretty conservative place, but the manner in which it was done was all informal, which is what made it illegal. And so here's the challenge. The banks in the U.S. are quasi-public-private partnerships. And it's very lucrative to be an executive at a big bank. I mean, look at Jamie Dimon's net worth. So if the government basically controls your charter, as Signature found out this weekend, what the government says to you, even informally, can have devastating consequences if you don't pay attention, right? And so if you whisper into Jamie Dimon's ear and say, look, you should probably stop banking with gun shops. And if they do so after sort of one of the many unfortunate and countless numbers of mass shootings that we have in the U.S., where the political pressure is high and there's a lot of sympathy for such a course of action. Whatever your views are on gun control, it is at the moment constitutionally protected. And but if you're a gun shop owner and Bank of America decides they're not going to, so here's a perfect example. As a fallout of Operation Chokepoint, once people realized that this was a possibility, anti-gun groups have been pressing the payment processors to put a new and unique tag on gun sales, as opposed to like general, let's just say general merchandise. I don't know what it's tagged at today, but they want a special tag on it. And the gun industry has been lobbying against that because once you have that tag, it's very easy with the flick of a switch to suddenly overnight PayPal, Stripe, stop processing payments for anybody involved in the industry. And so there's no question, not just banking, payment processors are a point source of power as well. So with Operation Chokepoint, the FDIC essentially put the word out to the banks that they should stop processing payments for these industries, and many did. And that's what caused the uproar. Much of that was overturned. As I said, they were sued, and the payday lenders effectively won that lawsuit. But over time, they keep coming back for another bite at the apple and another bite at the apple, and that's where poker was really the next big thing after that series of events, and so on and so forth. So poker led to Operation Chokepoint, which led to Operation Chokepoint 2.0. That's the sort of chronology of it. And now we see 2.0, and it's crypto. And okay, like you could say, I'm a no corner, and I've always answered no on that IRS. Do you have any digital currencies on my taxes correctly? And so maybe I just don't worry about it. Hey, as long as I don't do crypto, quote, I'll be fine. But that's not how this goes, right? Pretty soon it'll be, hey, your views on the solutions to climate change, we think that's disinformation. And so we think banking with you represents an unnecessary risk for our franchise. Here's a cashier's check for your account balance, and your account is closed. And you have no recourse. Like, that is totally possible.
Well, look, I can give you 2 examples from the UK. My personal bank, about 2 years ago, I banked with Lloyds. I'd been with them for 21 years, and I got a call from customer services asking me to run through some of my transactions. And I said to them, "Do I have to?" And they said no. I said, "Well, I'm not going to. I'm a grown up. I don't know who you are. Why am I talking to some random person in a call center about what I spend my money on? This is my money. If I've done anything illegal, then you have due process." And I received a letter, and my accounts were closed down 2 weeks later. And then separately, I'd moved my business account to a company called Wise. And Wise were very specific in their terms and conditions, saying that you cannot send your money to exchanges, to crypto exchanges, to buy and sell crypto. That's what it said. I had an invoice paid because we're a podcast where one of our sponsors is a crypto company. It's Gemini. So I had I received a payment from them. I'd received lots of payments, by the way, over the years for sponsorships. But when this one came in, they questioned it. And I said, it's a sponsor for my podcast. It's a Bitcoin podcast and they're a crypto company. And even though there was nothing in their terms and conditions, they immediately froze my bank account, froze access to my funds. I couldn't, there was no way I could have made payroll that week. I mean, I did eventually through personal money. I had to open up a new bank account, which took time, and transfer the funds across. And but there was no reasons given on either of them. It's we no longer want you as a customer. In both scenarios, where all I'd done is ask for some privacy on a personal level, and they didn't like the company I was doing business with.
Yeah. So in the piece Pandora's precedent, we said if your business has crypto in its name or you're considered a high-profile individual associated with the industry, prepare for possible ejection from the traditional banking system, and prepare for that. And it's scary because, again, it's not actually your money, and there's no way to operate outside of the banking system. Like it's the equivalent of telling people to build their own Twitter because they don't like the political nature of the censorship that happened, before and after the last election. Well, good luck with that if the servers aren't going to allow you to do it, or if the app stores aren't going to list your app. We live in a world where we need ultimately a new bill of financial freedom, like a new bill of financial rights. Like it should be much, much harder for a bank to close an account on somebody. Look, they have a legitimate right in many ways to ask about transactions. We've had those calls. We have a client from overseas, and when they pay our retainer, more often than not, it's probably too strong, but occasionally we get a call from a compliance officer at the bank asking for more details and can we see a copy of your contract, and is this person a real thing? Because they're not actually worried about us. They're worried about being accused by their regulators of not doing enough. It's kind of like, I don't know if this is the way it is in the UK, but in the US, it's become more and more, this is a different example, but I think it's a similar incrementalism. If you go buy a bottle of wine in the US today, and they have to check your ID, right? They have to make sure that you're over the legal drinking age, which in my state is 21. Well, I could tell you that at the grocery store, there's a little button on the computer where the person, because it's all self-checkout now, of course, too, because, they've gotten rid of all of those jobs. It used to be about 2 years ago that the button was, I acknowledge this person is over 30. And they didn't even have to look at your ID. Like it was incumbent upon the person looking at you saying, yeah, this person's not under the age of 21. Last year, that button got changed to, I acknowledge this person is under the age of 40. And now that button has been elevated to, I acknowledge that this person is under the age of 50. And every time I buy a bottle of wine, which is more often than not when I'm at the grocery store, they literally take my license and scan it in now. Right? And so it used to be you just showed your license and they looked at you and they knew that you weren't any issue. But now it's become, and why does a grocery store do that? They're not actually doubting that I'm over 21. They're deathly afraid of losing their liquor license.
Of course.
On a technicality.
We don't have with the licensing laws, we don't have the same here. It's do they, and it's different places. Do they look over 21 or 25? And that's a buffer. And they don't get in particular big trouble when they make mistakes. I mean, it happens, but it's not like the US where I still get asked for ID to buy alcohol. But what we do have a very similar thing in the banking sector. And what it is that the government has outsourced financial surveillance to the banks.
Yes, 100%. And by the way, it's a nuisance for me. And because I'm sensitive to such things, I always get mildly annoyed when it happens. But I give the person my driver's license and I buy my bottle of wine because I have guests coming over and I don't want to go through the pain of going to a store that doesn't yet do that, right? And so this is the perfect example of incrementalism and accepting an ever-encroaching surveillance state. And when you apply that very simple but powerful analogy, like it literally, I saw it with my own eyes. In the past 18 months, it's gone from 30 to 40 to 50. And it's soon, they'll just wipe that out and say, you must scan your driver's license to buy alcohol. That's what's coming. Like that's the, and then after that, it's, don't you think you've purchased enough alcohol, Mr. Doomberg? Like it's coming. And back to central bank digital currencies and all of these things converging on the Eye of Sauron, as Ben Hunt correctly describes the intent of the U.S. Treasury.
Well, it's this kind of surveillance singularity that's coming, which freaks me out as somebody who thinks they live in a fairly free society, but and tries not to be a conspiracy theorist, but at the same time is sympathetic to conspiracies because so many of them have come true.
Well, the origin of that phrase, of course, right? It was concocted by the CIA after Kennedy's assassination.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, it never existed in the vernacular before then, and it was created to take credibility away from those who were challenging the official narrative of President Kennedy's assassination. And so that's a rather, I find it so intellectually lazy when people are quick to dismiss interpretation of events as a, quote, conspiracy theory. That's always a flag for me that the person dismissing the hypothesis as a conspiracy theory has done very little intellectual work on the subject.
I think it's hard sometimes for people. I think especially maybe more so here in Europe than the US. I think the US, there's a certain political arm that is a little bit more distrusting of government, wants to be a little bit more independent. But I think in the US, you do a better job of distrusting government and questioning. Whereas I think in the UK and the Europe, we're a little bit more like, we just kind of accept everything. Yeah, that's fine. But for me, it's taken me a few years to kind of, like I said to you earlier, to shed these layers like an onion to the point where I was just like, look, this is bullshit. None of this makes sense. And trying to get enough people to do that is very, very hard because, I don't actually know. I can guess ideas. I think maybe some people just don't want to face this. They just want to get on with their life. Some people just find it too hard to believe that we're kind of steamrolling towards Chinese surveillance state style operations. I think there's a number of reasons, but I keep coming back to Doomberg. I keep coming back to look at what do we do? What can I do? What can we do about this? Because something has to change because we know where this heads, and it's not good.
So the analogy I would use over here in North America is Canada's very similar to Europe in that regard. Very polite country. I know the country extremely well. I have friends and relatives in the country. And you're correct in that the founding of the U.S. Occurred as a rebellion, of course, and ironically, it was a rebellion over taxes. Which the ultimate irony. Here we are, 2 centuries plus later, but the thing that unites Canadian and British culture is state-sponsored national broadcasting. The vast majority of Canadians get their news from the CBC. And I bet in the UK, the BBC is a very powerful influencer of culture. And
they lost a battle this week. They lost a big battle this week. I don't know if you were following it. This ex-professional footballer called Gary Lineker. He's one of England's most famous ever players. He was a striker until Wayne Rooney was our highest ever goal scorer. Much loved across the country. Not by everyone, but like the majority of people love him. He works on a show called Match of the Day on BBC. So on a Saturday, after all the games are played in the evening, it's an hour-long show. Him and 2 pundits, they watch highlights of the games and talk about them. It's a hugely popular show, massive cultural importance to people who love football in the UK. He came out and criticised the government. He said their language with regards to immigration reflects the kind of language you heard in 1930s Germany. He got massively criticised by the government. He said, look, the BBC is meant to be independent. It's meant to be an independent broadcaster. And so a lot of pressure came on him for these tweets. And then it was announced that the BBC said he would be stepping back from broadcasting this weekend. He came out and said, no, I didn't. I've been removed. And what happened was the 2 main pundits, Alan Shearer and Ian Wright, 2 ex-footballers as well, announced, well, we're not going to do it. And then every possible person who said who could have been somebody who could have replaced him on the show, said they're not going to do it either. And so all the professional sports people came back and said, we're not getting involved in this. Then they ran the show, but they ran the show with no intro, no commentary because all the commentators pulled out, no interviews with the players. So the show ended up being 20 minutes long, and it was basically the goals without any commentary. It was really, really weird. And they were forced into a corner because everybody backed Gary Lineker and said he should be able to have this speech, because there are other people within the BBC who do make political comments, but it's kind of ignored because their political comments maybe support the current party in power. And so the BBC has now had to back down, and he's retained his position. And so it was a big defeat and an important defeat for free speech in the UK, which is flimsy at best already.
It's funny. A loose analogy is, and perhaps a bit more controversial, is in Canada, of course, it's hockey, and the national pastime is Hockey Night in Canada on the CBC, and famously a commentator with a very checkered set of comments in the past by the name of Don Cherry. I don't know if that's a name that you're familiar with, but and he was ultimately fired from Hockey Night in Canada in 2019, and he's been sort of canceled, I guess, in Canadian culture. There wasn't the same. There was a backlash for sure, but it wasn't effective, I guess. I don't know all the details because, again, I live in the U.S., but it's just funny how the cultures have very similar. Hockey Night in Canada is your football, and so yeah, it is a fascinating time. It's a scary time, and as you said, we both know where this goes, and people think it hasn't happened to me yet, so it's not a big deal. And
yep.
And to be fair, it hasn't really happened to me yet. And I think it's a big deal. I think that's the difference, and sometimes I wish I could turn it off. Life's pretty good. Why don't I just swim with the current for a while and see how that goes? But it's just not our intellectual makeup. So,
yeah, I used to be a big fan of the BBC because being a state-sponsored broadcaster, there was a lot of suspicion around it, and therefore, in some ways, it was highly regulated. There are various committees or whatever that would ensure that it is being as impartial as possible. And look, you always knew there was a slight bias towards government that did exist. But at the same time, corporate media itself has its own biases. I mean, Rupert Murdoch's Sky News has its own biases. Whether it's Sky News TV or The Sun or The Times, which he owns, they would pick which party they're supporting. So, whether it's independent or state-sponsored, you always knew there's different biases. And there are parts of the BBC I do still like. They do some good reporting and do some good TV work. I don't know what the correct answer is to all this, but I just think itself was a very important win for free speech in the UK. And I think what I hope is we're going to get more of these wins. But anyway, listen, I'm going off a tangent here. I want to go back to the point. It's like, what do we do, man? What do you think we do? Well,
you have two choices. You do nothing, swim with the current, and hope it gets better or goes away, which is probably what most people will do. Or you use your platform, however big or small your platform might be, to politely engage in debate, which is what we try to do through the Doomberg platform. So we don't shy away from these controversies. We have our opinions. We write about them. Sometimes that annoys our subscribers. I'll give you an example where we wrote a piece that we knew would probably upset some of our subscribers. This was the piece that we wrote and made free to the public about the train derailment in Ohio.
Yeah.
And the complete and total hyperbole around that incident was off the charts, and it had quickly evolved into a political weapon to hammer the Biden administration, especially his Secretary of Transportation, who has become sort of a perennial target of the right. People would probably characterize Doomberg as a center-right libertarian publication, and we would concur with that. And so we knew that by saying, look, here's what's really happening here, and this is not an issue that should be used to hammer the Biden administration effectively, if you read between the lines. We got scores of infuriated emails, people that were just infuriated that we would stand up to this mania, because in their mind, for example, the thing that angered people the most was we said, we actually think this document that the EPA put on their website is correct, which listed the contents of all the rail cars and what happened to them. And the reason why we said we're trusting our analysis on that document is because it was published before this became a controversy. It was online at the EPA website before this blew up, before this mushroomed into this political controversy. And the piece was called Railroaded, and we systematically went through each of the rail cars and explained what was in them, and what the likely consequences of either the spill or the fire was, and said correctly, this is a very big deal locally. It is something to keep an eye on regionally, and it is not a very big story nationally. These things happen all the time, and we shouldn't overreact. And immediately people put it into their team sport game of gotcha. This was the glasses through which they read that piece. Not everybody, not even the majority, but a very loud minority. Canceled, we lost many subscribers for it. You'd be amazed, But we knew that when we wrote it. We committed to ourselves that we would do it. We and decided that the brand ambition of Doomberg can withstand. We built up enough credibility with our readership that they would look. As we said, if there was true doom here, we would have written about it because this is in our center of expertise. We come from the commodity sector. This is what we know. And I had at least as many outpouring of support from executives in those industries saying, thank you for bringing, a bucket of sanity to this fire of hyperbole.
But the thing is, it makes you more of a trusted source, which is, I think, we talked about Rogan earlier. I think that's why he's become a trusted source, because whether you agree with him or not, he isn't partisan. And you always believe what he says is what he actually believes, whether you agree with him or not. And there is too much audience capture now within independent media because it suffers from the same incentives. But if you're willing to go out and go against what your readers are expecting, and you're willing to lose readers and subscribers to tell the right story, ultimately it makes you more of a trusted source.
Yeah, our rule is we would never write anything we don't believe in the moment that we wrote it, period. That's rule number one. And then rule number two is if we can't defend it, we shouldn't write it, right? And look, we've been very fortunate. We've grown a large audience. We've been able to be successful on Substack, and so it's easy for us to say, oh, we're willing to withstand the several dozen people that angrily unsubscribed and let us know about it on the way out. But, Joe Rogan can take the easy way out too, and he doesn't. And so we would much rather be smaller and more trusted than larger and have less durable engagement with our audience, right? And I could tell you that if we started a completely new Twitter account today, after everything we've learned on Twitter, not associated with Doomberg whatsoever, we could grow that account to 1 million followers in less than a year.
Yeah.
Very, very systematic formula to do that. And intellectual integrity would not be a key element of that recipe.
Yeah, well, look, it's the same doing a podcast. If you said to me, look, Pete, I want you to have a record month of 2 million downloads, I know how to do it. I know which guests to get. I know which topics to cover. I know which opinions to hold. But I always think you've got to try and maintain that personal integrity. And even in the face of people criticize, you go onto my YouTube, my comments are, largely criticized for being a little bit, I don't consider myself on the left, but I'm sympathetic to people on the left, and I get the same. But look, I think it's important to push through that kind of inertia that comes with holding into intellectual honesty. So I commend you for it, and it's one of the reasons I'm a subscriber, because I don't actually see a political persuasion in what you're doing. I see alignment, but I don't see it as a bias.
Yeah, well, the ultimate example is my wife and kids are far to the left of me, and I love them, and hopefully they love me. We coexist in a home where I can assure you that my wife and I have never voted in the same way, and one of my children just became of voting age, and now I'm outnumbered 2-1. I used to be able to joke that at least I got to cancel my wife's vote. That's no longer the case, and. But again, we can have political disagreements and be a family. And one of the best decisions we ever made is we closed comments on our Substack to paying subscribers, even for the free pieces that we put out.
Interesting.
And by the way, the discourse is elevated. These are we still get criticized, and the first thing we do when we get a politely expressed criticism is thank them, of course, and then explain why we have a different position than them. But we have a joke here. It's you control us all you want, but you have to pay for the privilege now.
I love it, man. All right, listen, is there anything I've not asked you about today with relation to this that you wish I'd have asked you?
No, I think we covered it pretty good, just like last time. I always enjoyed the conversation with you, Peter. And
I love it, man.
Thanks for having me on again.
No, you're always welcome. Just continue what you're doing. I love the emails. I think they're great. All of us here at What Bitcoin Did, there's 7 of us who work on the show. We're all big fans of what you do. Where do you want to send people listening?
We would prioritize people heading straight to Substack. Do not pass Twitter. Do not collect $200. In all seriousness, our work is at Substack, Doomberg.substack.com. We're very proud to partner with Substack, who's a really, I think, courageous startup, and we do hope they succeed, and we're doing everything we can to help them succeed in big and small ways. We are still on Twitter, of course, at DoombergT. Twitter is a bit more challenging these days, and we've kind of pulled back from it a little bit just for our own mental safety. I told you about our editor earlier, but we are publishing 6 to 8 pieces a month. We always try to make them, we live and die by every piece. Our goal is that the latest piece is our most favorite, always. And if a piece doesn't reach that level of, generally we were excited to publish Don Jerome this morning. And the day where we're not excited to publish a piece is the day we won't publish a piece. And that's our commitment to our audience. Once again, Peter, really appreciate the opportunity. Love chatting with you, and best of luck to you as things go forward.
Yeah, no worries. Listen, we'll share that all out in the show notes. I advise anyone listening to subscribe. The emails are brilliant. Like I say, we love them. We read them all here. I certainly read them all. And keep doing what you're doing. Good luck. Congratulations on the success. I hope you continue to grow. I think you're a really important news source, especially on the energy side of things. It's been really helpful to me because a lot of my thoughts or understanding of the energy sector has shifted over the last year or two, and your work there has been very helpful. So thank you. Keep going. I'm sure we'll talk again in a few months.
Thanks, Peter.